On Christmas Eve, 1914, along a frozen scar of trenches that cut for hundreds of miles across Belgium and France, something drifted across the deadliest strip of land on Earth. It was not a bullet. It was not the scream of an incoming shell. It was a sound, singing, faint and distant at first, then rising, clear and unmistakable from the enemy lines. And thousands of men who had spent weeks doing nothing but trying to kill each other stopped what they were doing and listened. What unfolded over the next few hours would seem almost impossible to believe if it were not so well documented. Enemy soldiers would climb up out of their trenches, unarmed, and walk into the open killing ground between the lines. They would shake hands. They would share food and cigarettes, swap small gifts, show each other photographs of home, and bury their dead together. For one extraordinary night, in a war that would kill millions, the fighting simply stopped. And then their commanders found out what was happening. Because the men freezing in the mud had stumbled onto something the generals could never allow to spread. They had discovered, face to face, that the enemy was human. What began as a spontaneous miracle in the middle of no man's land would end with furious orders raining down from headquarters and a grim, iron determination that such a thing must never, ever be permitted to happen again. When the First World War broke out in the summer of 1914, almost everyone on both sides was certain it would be a short, glorious affair. The young men marching off to fight were told, again and again, that they would be home victorious by Christmas. Instead, the war ground itself into a monstrous, unmoving deadlock. Two vast armies dug themselves into the cold earth and faced one another across a shattered wasteland, unable to advance and unwilling to retreat. By December, the Western Front had become a frozen hell of mud, icy water, rats, disease, and endless barbed wire. In many places, the opposing trenches lay only 50 or 60 yards apart, close enough for the soldiers to hear the enemy coughing, talking, and singing in the dark. Both sides were cold beyond description, exhausted, desperately homesick, and surrounded on all sides by the frozen bodies of friends they could not even reach to bury. Nobody sitting in a headquarters somewhere planned what was about to happen. There was no treaty, no official ceasefire, no order handed down from above to stop the fighting. The truce that was about to ripple across the front lines would rise up entirely on its own, unbidden from the ordinary men shivering in the ground, on the one single night of the year that still meant something deep and powerful to almost every one of them, no matter which uniform they wore. It began, in most accounts, on the German side. As darkness fell on Christmas Eve, British soldiers cautiously peering over their parapets began to see tiny points of light appearing along the enemy trench line. The Germans were setting out small Christmas trees, some sent from home, and lighting candles on the very edge of no man's land, in full, open view of the men who were supposed to be aiming rifles at them. Then the singing started in earnest. Still nacht, silent night, rolling softly across the frozen ground in German. When the carol ended, there was a pause, and then the British answered with a carol of their own, sung back across the wire. And so it went back and forth through the freezing night air, two enemy armies serenading one another across the exact same ground where, only days before, they had been slaughtering each other without mercy. Slowly, cautiously, voices began to call out across the narrow gap between the trenches. "Merry Christmas. We will not shoot if you will not shoot." Someone, somewhere, suggested actually meeting in the middle. It was almost certainly a trap. Every hard-earned instinct these men had screamed that it had to be a trap. And yet, here and there all along the line, a few impossibly brave, reckless souls decided to climb out and find out for themselves. One by one at first, and then in growing groups, soldiers pulled themselves up out of the relative safety of their trenches and stepped out into no man's land, the killing ground that had claimed so many lives. They walked slowly toward one another with empty hands held open and visible. And instead of the crack of rifle fire, there were handshakes. In the frozen dark, sworn enemies stood face to face and, unbelievably, began to smile and laugh together. They exchanged whatever small treasures they had on them: cigarettes and fat cigars, chocolate and hard biscuits, tins of preserved food and jam, and buttons and badges cut straight from their own uniforms to keep as souvenirs of this impossible night. They pulled out photographs of wives, parents, and children and passed them around. Some of the soldiers, it turned out, had lived and worked in each other's countries before the war, and they chatted away like long-lost neighbors. In a few spots along the front, the beloved legend goes, they even produced a ball and kicked it around, boots sliding and slipping in the frozen mud, a rough and joyful game of football between men who, by the next morning, were meant to go straight back to being deadly enemies. For a few short, precious hours, the greatest and most terrible war the world had ever known dissolved into something that felt almost like an ordinary holiday. But the truce was about far more than gifts, songs, and games of football. Scattered across no man's land lay the bodies of men from both armies who had fallen in earlier attacks, left where they died because it was suicide to try to recover them under fire. Now, in the sudden, blessed quiet, both sides finally could. Former enemies worked side by side to gently carry the dead back to their own lines and dig graves in the hard, frozen ground. In places along the line, they went even further and held joint funeral services. Soldiers of both armies stood together, bareheaded in the biting cold, as prayers and psalms were read aloud in two different languages over shared graves. Men who had been doing everything in their power to kill one another now stood shoulder to shoulder, grieving together for the fallen of both sides. It was perhaps the single most profoundly human moment of the entire war. And that, precisely, was the problem, at least in the eyes of those far behind the lines. Because it is a very, very hard thing to shoot a man once you have shaken his hand, laughed at his jokes, seen the photograph of his children, and helped him bury his friends beside your own. The soldiers in the mud had caught a glimpse of a truth their leaders simply could not afford to let them keep. And those leaders were about to move quickly and ruthlessly to take it away from them. When word of the Christmas truce reached the high commands on both sides, the reaction was cold fury. This was not touching in the eyes of the generals. It was a dangerous breakdown of discipline, an outbreak of peace that, if left unchecked, could rot an army from the inside out and destroy its will to fight. Fraternizing with the enemy was a serious military offense, and officers up and down the line were sternly reminded of exactly that. In the days and weeks that followed, commanders worked deliberately to stamp the truce out and make sure nothing like it ever grew again. Units that had joined the ceasefire were rotated away from the very men they had befriended. Fresh artillery barges were ordered to shatter the fragile quiet and reignite the hatred. In later years, generals are said to have deliberately scheduled attacks and heavy bombardments over the holidays, specifically so that no such brotherhood could ever take root a second time. Slowly, reluctantly, the guns began to speak again. Some soldiers, according to the stories, fired their first shots high into the air on purpose, unwilling to aim at the men whose photographs they had just held. But the machinery of war reclaimed them all the same. The killing resumed. It would grind on relentlessly for 4 more terrible years, consuming the lives of millions upon millions of young men across the world. The Christmas truce of 1914 was never again repeated on anything like the same scale. As the war dragged on, it grew crueler, the weapons deadlier, and the hatred far deeper, until the space for such simple mercy vanished completely. But for one cold night, ordinary men on both sides proved something the world has never quite forgotten. That even the very heart of history's bloodiest slaughter, the enemy was only ever another frightened, freezing, homesick human being. It is remembered now as a small, stubborn miracle. And miracles like it were achingly rare, because most of what that war produced was the exact opposite. Weapons and tactics so terrifying they would spawn dark legends all their own.